Hello, welcome to the presentation. So our theme highlights Indigenous rights, especially for women and children. Paintings, sculptures, decorative art, and pictures promoting Indigenous peoples' cultural freedom and rights allow us to understand the painful past better and accept the mistakes brought up by the assimilation of white culture. Today, as student nurses, we are responsible for creating a kind environment that is aware and sensitive to the past, promotes cultural safety, that aims to make people feel safe and receive care. We ensure Indigenous people's safety and care for them without any biases. We were also allowing ourselves to communicate and advocate their rights regarding their health because if they trust the healthcare system, it will promote cultural safety. Lastly, respecting different cultures, primarily Indigenous, and making ways to promote decolonization of the healthcare system will help strengthen local care and avoid more trauma and distrust of Indigenous people in the system that should be caring for them. This slide highlighted the impact of assimilation on Indigenous people. The first contact between Europeans and Indigenous people opened many opportunities to explore the diverse and bountiful resources of the land, but opportunities led to exploitation. Cultural differences are one of the many factors that caused a deepening crisis between these competing groups. The story of residential schools has deeply scarred survivors and their families. The pain cannot be quickly buried because discrimination affects their values, resulting in loss of identity, such as being discriminated against for speaking their native language. The spear point targets to raise the barriers against partialities between individuals regardless of age, gender, social status, and cultural background, and promote the equality that will ensure every individual has equal opportunities to thrive that will uphold their dignity. This slide represents the Indigenous children taken into residential schools to disconnect from their roots at a young age as a part of assimilation. The survivors recollect their stolen childhood, which brought them trauma up to this day. Residential schools strategically blunted Indigenous cultures and families for generations, illustrating how their rights are being violated in terms of cultural preservation. Culture and traditions were disrupted, and children were significantly discriminated emotionally, sexually, and psychologically. Two of my group mates can relate to the concept of assimilation because they are immigrants from the Philippines. The Spaniards colonized them for 100 years. Children were taken out at a young age to become servants of people in power in society, and their values and culture were forcibly taken out to adapt to foreign cultures that they still carry up to this day. The painting Broken Woman, Je Existais, and the sculpture Memorial for Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls symbolizes the horror of marginalization because of gender and ethnicity. Indigenous women and children are peaceful, living their lives, but eventually murdered and gone missing. This masterpiece also expresses the deep-rooted sadness of the families of these women and children and their unjustifiable deaths. From week five's pre-reading about stolen children, where they had been taken and put in residential schools, we can see the relationship between murdered and missing women with the stolen children, because those in power at that time wanted to assimilate Indigenous people into the so-called civilization. Still, the prize for this is a broken generation wanting justice and peace. It is also essential to accept past mistakes and better understand and be thoughtful enough to do things to lessen the pain of those lost lives. The baby socks knitted by Marie Louise Mark symbolizes a mother's unfading love for his son. Although her son was taken when he was 10 months old, she never forgets and memorializes him by knitting him a sock. The socks show that any mother has gone through the pain of losing their children because the government's greed in seeking dominance, imposing laws and regulations for the sake of the majority, and not thinking about the long-term effects of cultural genocide and injustices caused by these rules. The painting Till Victory shows the memory of the lives taken, either women and children or men who fought for their rights, and has a unique and rich culture. Also, this emphasizes that justice and peace can be achieved, and Indigenous people, or even minorities, can be free to express themselves. Lastly, it is vital to show resiliency and courage to move on and show that we deserve to be treated equally, regardless of culture, ethnicity, and color. The images on this slide represent a loss of culture among the Indigenous peoples. The image on the left is about the residential schools, the 60 scoop, and the child welfare system. All these events led to the children losing their culture and having severe trauma that is being passed down through the generations, causing mistrust and anger for the system that they are forced to be a part of. The image to the right is about how English and French are the official languages of Canada. Indigenous languages are not considered official in Canada, but there are plenty of people that speak them. Indigenous people have the right to communicate in their own language, but because Indigenous languages were basically ignored by the Canadian government until recently, their prevalence has diminished significantly, which hurts Indigenous culture and their right to communicate in their own language. Indigenous rights have historically been disrespected, but as time has gone on, the Canadian government is trying to apologize for all the horrible things they did by acknowledging and apologizing for the wrongdoings of the past and helping everyone move forward with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Although the government is doing what they can to promote reconciliation, there's still a dark past ingrained in Canada's roots, and mistrust and anger can still exist. So we must ask, what can we do as student nurses to fight this and encourage trust and cultural safety in the healthcare system? A few things we can do, or we can acknowledge the pain that Indigenous people have endured, not only in residential schools, but as the children and grandchildren of the survivors who may have had the trauma passed on to them. And we can continue growing our knowledge of the pain that has been caused. With this knowledge, we can advocate for the patient and make sure they're getting the best care we can give them. There has been plenty of injustice in Canada's history, leading to Indigenous people having their rights and culture get taken away from them. And as student nurses, we have to understand the history that has led us here, and we have to learn how to care for someone who may struggle to trust our healthcare system due to that history. In order to do that, we need to be respectful in the care of our Indigenous patients and understand what they have been through. We have to be part of the change that leads to a better healthcare system for everyone. And these are our references.